me. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, comrades and compañeros, welcome back to another edition of the Moynihan Report. I almost said Fifth Column. I should have just let that go, but I almost said the other show that I do. But this one is better. And you know why? Because we have better guests. And today I'm very happy because I emailed him a whole bunch. And he blocked me one time, called the police on me. But I finally cornered Thomas Chatterton Williams. My friend, you still at Bard? Do you still have the affiliation with
Yes,
Bard?
sir. Yeah.
Hannah Arendt Center?
Exactly.
Like that, right?
Yeah.
Also a staff writer at The Atlantic, the author of Self-Portrait in Black and White. Do I have that right?
Yep.
And your latest book, which has a subtitle I'm not going to remember, so you're going to tell me what the name of the subtitle is, too.
The book is
That's
called
you. You wrote
Summer of Our Discontent.
Yeah.
That's
What's
the title.
subtitle?
Subtitle is The Age of Certainty and the Demise of Discourse.
That's why I didn't remember. It's smart for me.
It's too long.
It's too long and too smart, but it's a great book. I finished it this morning. It's true.
Oh, cool. Thank
And
you.
the reason I didn't finish it last night is because I was getting drunk with you.
Yeah.
It's actually true.
You wouldn't have remembered what you read. if you
No,
started.
I don't remember our conversation last night, but I'm sure we'll repeat some of it today. Thomas, thank you so much for being here. Loved the book. As 2020 was happening, which is the summer of our discontent, I remember being on the other side of it, sort of late 2020, and talking to our mutual friend, Camille Foster, and saying, somebody is going to have to make a documentary about this year. Somebody's going to have to write a book about this year. Because to me, it seemed like 2020 was, I can't really say our generation, because I don't know what generation we are, but there was a moment where I said, this is 1968. This is a 68 type moment where so many crazy things are happening and the culture seems to be changing so much. It's 2025 and I don't know what happened, because the people who seem to be in control of the culture don't seem to be any longer. Am I kind of wrong about that? I mean, Donald Trump won. There's people say words that they didn't say before. People are less afraid of being canceled, which you write about quite a bit in the book. Where are we now in comparison to 2020?
That's a great way of framing it. I think that right now we are still living in the aftermath of 2020.
Yes.
We're fully in the backlash to the kind of dynamics that were put in place and really that achieved a kind of peak dominance in 2020 that were already present in the 2010s. But, Donald Trump, on the left, they often say, why are we talking about 2020 right now?
Yeah.
Donald Trump's in office. It's pointless to go back and talk about the minor mistakes that were made by the left in 2020. There's an emergency right now, but you can't really understand the level of vehemence that swept Trump back into power without understanding the degree to which I think the left made mistakes when it dominated the culture and politics.
So this is the question. We were, you and I were both at a conference a couple of weeks ago, a free speech conference.
Nashville, Tennessee.
In Nashville, Tennessee at Vanderbilt University. And we were on stage together. We talked about your book a bit. And when I got off stage, I got a text from somebody in the audience who was angry at me for suggesting that 2020 and some of the excesses of that era ushered in the Trump era. And we went, we were in the same audience, by the way. We were texting each other, not talking, texting each other.
That's weird.
That was weird. It was a bit hostile. But I wonder, there are people who say Donald Trump won the election in 2024 because the Democrats ran a partially deceased person for a bit of the election and then a historically bad candidate for the rest of the election. That's why he's won. But I think that there's a lot to that, but I think the culture shift is kind of part of it too. What do you see in the culture shift part of this? I mean, there's so many things I read in your book. It's like stuff that I couldn't even remember how crazy we were.
Right. You need to also just have a kind of account that's just bearing witness to what happened, because so much is memory hold, and a lot of people don't want to acknowledge the degree to which they were fine with things that in retrospect look completely crazy.
Crazy.
Like, there were, people almost can't remember that there were crowds of people walking through downtown city streets and accosting, crowds of white people walking through downtown city streets and accosting white diners at tables for not being with them marching for George Floyd and for Black lives.
You don't think that's how you get people on your side?
I don't
Intimidating them when they're having a bagel?
In retrospect, that's how to get people to join your cause. The kind of the insanity around posting the black square on Instagram. This kind of like non-thinking need to signal that you were anti-racist. The idea that it would be good to abolish police departments. Some of these things that we still talk about, but much of the excess and the kind of exuberance of the moment, I think people have forgotten. So part of the book is a documentary project. And then the other aspect of your question.
The Trump stuff. I think that
Trump could have lost. Yes, of course.
Trump was a beneficiary of this stuff.
Very much so. He was a completely defeatable candidate.
Yeah.
The weekend at Bernie's presidency, I think, was the single most damaging reason why Democrats couldn't win. For sure, that was a massive problem, and Kamala was a weak candidate. But with that said, why was Trump even in the mix to begin with? He was a completely defeated figure after January 6, 2021. There was a moment at which it seemed impossible to believe that he could come back. And people often say, well, he didn't win in 2020 because actually there is no backlash against wokeness. If there was a backlash against wokeness, he would have won in 2020. But I don't think that's how it works. I think it was a much more slow-moving.
It's a slow-moving process.
Absolutely.
Right? We did actually. Do you remember when we thought? I was on record saying I thought that Ron DeSantis had a pretty good chance because, he's a good retail politician. He's done. There's a lot of things I disagree with the guy on, but just as an outside observer, okay, he did pretty well in disaster relief in Florida, et cetera. He's fighting the culture war battles, but Trump, the hand that comes out of the grave and pops up, and he's the undead, and you can't get rid of it. But I think that there's so much of this stuff now. One of the things I was thinking about reading your book is the 80-20 issues, right? And the 80-20 issues, like trans athletes in sports, right? There's a lot of examples of people getting canceled or getting in a lot of trouble, or you ritually denouncing J.K. Rowling, people that literally their careers were made by her, people that were in the movies, the Harry Potter movies, feeling that they had to go out and say something to separate themselves from this monstrous woman. And then this morning, I went through all the numbers, the latest poll numbers, and they're firmly on J.K. Rowling's side.
Of course.
What is that? Why do people, how is it that the 80-20 issue, there was a long period of time where the 20 were really dominating the public conversation in media, et cetera?
Well, that's the aspect in the book that I really tried to spend some time on establishing. That's the technological aspect of it. There was this period of time that overlapped with, I think, a kind of blooming discontent that the first black president didn't actually
it's your
solve
first chapter
racism. So at the moment that Black Lives Matter was really taking off, you had this sense that race and injustice mattered, and you had this kind of organizing technology with social media, which all of, everybody, Twitter was the place to be in the 2010s. And you had a kind of dynamic where the most extreme activists and influencers on the left were able to, even though they were 20% of the issue, they were able to really beat into submission that 80% that really didn't know how to handle this new dynamic of being swarmed online and being canceled and stigmatized online. Now I would say that we're in a very different place where that dynamic is really coming from the right. They're weaponizing, social media and internet culture to be able to beat, I think, this kind of exhausted middle that really doesn't love the extreme left or the extreme right. The right is now able to beat that critical mass into submission right now. But this way of making very unpopular positions be mandatory, I think, couldn't happen without the internet the way that it was, the newness of social media.
Yeah, I want to steal that. Can we write that down when we change the name of the show? Because I want to change the name of the show to The Exhausted Middle. Because that's, I think, how I feel, and a lot of my friends feel. Because, look, you're not a man of the right.
No.
You're largely, I wouldn't say a man of the left, I think you're a liberal, right? Sort of center-left guy. But you wrote a memoir about being a black man in America and in France and growing up with the ethnic identity that you had, but you don't have the views that you're supposed to have on so many racial issues. 2020 comes, and some ridiculous wag decides to call this our racial reckoning. We're going to have another reckoning. I don't know what we're reckoning with, the bad behavior of a police officer in Minneapolis. But when you're writing about this stuff, and you just had to write a book about this stuff, you're writing for The Atlantic, you're speaking publicly about this stuff, you're not loved by a lot of the mainstream, what people would say the mainstream black intellectual class, Ta-Nehisi Coates, Nicole Hannah-Jones, people in that universe. What is it like to have a racial identity that other people put upon you and say you have to have particular ideas, and then to go outside and draw outside those lines? I mean, what is that like, even just on a personal level, a day-to-day level? Are you cast out of certain things? Do people look at you with skepticism that they wouldn't if you had the de rigueur ideas about things?
That's an insightful question. I mean, what is it like day to day to be somebody that's out of sync with the supposed ideas and values of the group that other people ascribe their membership to?
Yeah.
For me, I think these things are dispositional. I have a kind of personality where I don't really mind being alone. Or being,
do you mind being
minority.
criticized?
What's that? I don't really mind being criticized. I think that everybody can be frustrated with bad faith criticism, but I realize that Glenn Lowry, one of the 2 or 3 black public intellectuals who does have dinner with me, and that's a joke.
John McWhorter, Glenn Lowry,
John,
Coleman.
Glenn, Colvin, Camille. No, but there's many more people, and privately, people can be much more complex than they can allow themselves to be perceived online. So plenty.
But
of
you
people,
guys, all those people, and this is I just wanted to interject this because you guys all have very different politics.
For sure.
Very different politics.
Yeah.
But you're grouped together.
We're grouped together always.
Yeah.
Because most people more or less, I think, allow themselves to go along with whatever the supposed monolithic identity of the group is. But in private, I want to say a lot of black public intellectuals and people are much more nuanced, and I'm friendly with plenty of people who publicly would never retweet something I say or
Doesn't that bother you though?
I think I've been around the game long enough to understand that a lot of people have a much lower threshold for conflict and stigmatization than I do. I'm kind of fine being in that contrarian position, and I think the kind of the fervor with which the in-group contrarian is attacked or made an example of is much more intense than if you're just being attacked by the other side. It's not as passionate as when you're almost agreeing on most things that are considered important, but you're not quite there, and you just won't get into line with what the group wants you to say. That kind of provokes a response that I think is particular, and I think that's what actually joins people as different as me, Camille, Coleman, John, and Glenn, is that on some issue here or there, we don't fully go along, and you have to be made an example of. You have to be publicly shunned, so
to keep everybody in line.
To enforce consensus.
Yeah.
But just dispositionally, growing up with an older brother who really made me be able to withstand, I think, criticism and just the family dynamics I come from, I don't mind it. And also, I've been living abroad for 15 years. And so in a way that also makes it easier, I think, to take a step back and think from a position of being outside the group, because I'm also physically outside of the group a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So I don't have to have lunch with all these people. I don't have to, my social life doesn't depend on being invited to certain parties.
I mean, I want to get back to the book because there's so much fascinating stuff in it. But in a brief digression, you live a lot of the time in France. You've lived a lot of the last, decade plus of your life in France. You have kids who are French citizens. I have a child who's a European passport holder too. But the difference is that no one says, what is an Irish, Italian,
Right.
alcoholic.
That's your primary.
Yeah, that's my
identity
primary
here, right?
identity. What are you supposed to think about? There's no rules to that. There isn't one way, by the way, is that if you're Irish American from Boston back in the day, people would suspect that you were a supporter of Sinn Féin and the Irish Republican cause, which I'm not. Actually, I'm not at all. So I'm like you in that very small way. But what does it do to you in the way that you think about this country? Specifically being a black person who lives in Europe. I mean, I've lived abroad a lot of my life too. And it's the opposite of so many people that I know who say, I love the way it is there, is the trains are fantastic and everyone gets, 35-hour work weeks and 150 weeks of vacation, every 10 years or something. There's all these great, the math on that doesn't work, but it's fine. There's all these great things to say, but as far as like, you're a black man in America who's supposed to think very specific things and you don't. Has Europe changed the way you think about America when it comes to race relations and just kind of cultural stuff in general? I mean, it's made me over time much more positive about America.
It has done both for me.
Oh, both positive and negative.
Yes, for sure. There are things that you simply have to appreciate about the kind of invention that is America, the kind of the opportunities that exist here, the dynamism of this society. Yeah. I mean, Europeans, I remember when I was first over there and it was the Bush era and Europeans were so disappointed in us. Yeah. That was actually more intense in some ways than the Trump era. You were always getting lectured.
Much more.
They were so upset with us. But then when we elected Barack Obama, I would get stopped. People would say that, as much as America can do wrong or has done wrong, it can reach heights that we ourselves cannot possibly reach as a society. America is so inspiring. And you kind of have this pride as an American when you're abroad and you realize that it's such an identity of... It matters to be American. People care about your culture. They care about your politics. You're treated better in places like France, being American, than if you're from another country. Yeah. There's all these ways in which you appreciate the fact of your Americanness. But then when I return to America, I oftentimes see the society through the eyes of a European. And I can't take for granted certain things that I wouldn't have necessarily noticed. So you come back to America and you see that there's a floor of dignity so much lower for the people who are most vulnerable here. Or you see there's a kind of unhealthiness you fly to the airport in Atlanta or North Carolina and you can be amazed by how unhealthy people physically appear.
You can just say that we're fatter.
I don't know.
That's fine.
Yeah, I don't know what
he's trying to say that we're fat. Just say that we're fat. We're a fat people. We understand it. We accept it. We shouldn't accept it, but we do. Yeah, it's not. I was in Denmark with someone this summer, and it was like, it's not only like everyone's blonde and good looking; they're all just like really thin.
They're all really healthy.
Yeah, so they invented like Ozempic there. I think.
Yeah,
that's.
So you just don't in France see. A 35-year-old being driven through the airport for no other reason than they can't walk because they're so obese that they can't walk to their gate. That's something that you see all the time.
Can I make a defense of that?
Was that?
Can I make a defense
Sure.
of that? It's the person who famously said when their brother was coming from India and said, "Why do you want to live in America?" He said, "Well, I want to live in a country where the poor people are fat." So there's that, but we're a little too much. But as far as race relations are concerned, I mean, I used to get this when I was in Sweden all the time. It'd be like, "Oh, you Americans and your slavery and your the racial oppression," and I would always say to them, "Just you wait." And it happened because the difference between the Bush era and the Trump era is you have more people that are sympathetic to Trump in Europe now because you have a much bigger right-wing populism all across the continent because of immigration, and they have not done well at that, whereas I think that we have been, for all of our faults, a particularly good at assimilating racial groups despite all of the bad things that are in our past.
That's true. To have a deeper answer to your question, I think one of the things that you really realize America does so well is assimilate different groups, even in this moment of intense polarization. We really do assimilate Muslims, people from all over the world, previously enslaved populations that are native. We've done more as a society, I think, that's laudable along those lines than any country in Europe has come close to.
Yeah.
You would just not want to be a person of Arab descent in France more than you would want to be that same person in America. Your life is much more open in American society, if I can broadly generalize, than if you're Algerian and born in France.
Yeah.
At the same time, and this is what my second book, Self-Portrait in Black and White, is really about, the experience of having children in France and suddenly being confronted with what is my racial identity, what will be their racial identity. I've been raised with these stories and ideas about a drop of black blood making a person black no matter what else they have in them or how they appear. I would have to present that story as plausible in a society that didn't necessarily start from those same presuppositions. And I began to hear how absurd the story of race that I had grown up with in America was. And I had to start to question from the foundation what kind of inheritance about thinking about herself as a racialized being would I
This is your daughter.
Yeah, would I allow my daughter to have? And that's when I began, through the experience of living in Paris, to reject the idea of race, and to come closer to your colleague Camille Foster's point of view that really, like, race must be on some fundamental level abolished if we're ever to finally transcend racism. And so I don't know that I could have had that same experience even with a daughter who looked essentially white presenting. My daughter has blonde hair, blue eyes, very pale skin. I don't know if I would have even arrived at that conclusion were she growing up in America, but it was the experience of being outside the American story that forced me to see things, I think, in a truer way, because I wasn't able to take some biases for granted.
Do you suspect that your daughter will, and what would you imagine the reaction would be if she was in the United States or even in France and she said, "I'm black," and she's blonde-haired, light-skinned, blue eyes? Would people look at her like, "You're out of your mind. What are you talking about?"
In France, it would be, "You're out of your mind."
Yeah. Would you, and here, I mean, that's the amazing thing about race, is how quickly it just is not visible, right? I mean, people have been passing, quote unquote, for a long time in this country. And that's only a few generations in which people are passing. I mean, there was a very, very famous fascist, an American fascist. His last name was Dennis. And it turned out much later, he went to jail on this famous, he was prosecuted in the sedition trial in the 40s, that he was pro-Nazi Germany. He was black. And there were photos of him when he was young where he was much more visibly non-white, but he passed, but he passed as a fascist.
Like Chappelle's skin.
Dennis?
Yeah,
it's exactly
amazing.
right. It's the Chappelle's, like, blind black Klansman. But like, that is the kind of stuff where you're like, race is, I mean, Camille always says race is a fiction, but it is this kind of racecraft. The absurdity of it, to me, in certain ways, I mean, particularly when you have a daughter that would not be visibly, but I mean, what do people in France, do they think that you're a black American, or they assume?
No, so it started even before I had my child, that I was having to find myself explaining the laws of hypodescent that would have enslaved me in Louisiana, and therefore I am black, because in America you're either black or white. And I would find myself explaining when people would ask me where I'm from or what my identity is, and I would explain to them that I'm black, and then they would kind of look at me, politely, but surely there's more to the story than that. And then, they always would ask quite politely, but, insistently, but why does one identity cancel out the other? Or how can it possibly be a binary when you draw on ancestry from Europe and from Africa? Why does the conversation work like that? And you'd find yourself kind of making the kind of the plantation owner's case about race to people that don't start with those assumptions. And it was ringing hollow for me to explain race over and over
in the
again.
way that a racist would explain.
In the way that a racist would explain it, to kind of explain to people who are just asking innocently, why, if you have a white mother and a black father and your black father is already somewhat mixed, why did you just say you're black? And right before my daughter was born, I wrote an op-ed in the New York Times arguing that a drop of black blood makes a person black, and that my daughter will be black, and that mixed race black people have a moral duty to define themselves as black.
You wrote this what
in
year?
a form of solidarity, 2012, and she was born in 2013. And I realized in retrospect that I was writing that op-ed for an audience of one. I was really trying to convince myself, as I realized already that I would very likely have a daughter who would not be white, and she's not being raised thinking of herself as white, but she's raised to question those categories, and also, she's raised to think, what would it mean for me to be black looking this way, but what would it also mean for me to think I'm white if I have, a grandfather who grew up under Jim Crow in Texas, as my father did.
Yeah.
So she just has a more complicated sense of herself. I can't tell her how she'll grow up and define herself, but she's being given the option of not just reproducing the all-American skin game that would tell her that she's black and she'd check a black box if she's applying to college. Well, maybe that's not happening anymore, but you understand what I'm saying. And over there, people want to just reduce her identity to essentially being white. And so she has to always insist on being a more complicated person than the world perceives. But I think that's a healthy thing to do. And along with her, I started making that same kind of commitment to thinking of myself in more complicated ways than I had prior to her. So I don't define myself as black either.
Do you kind of take back everything you wrote in that piece, or a lot of it?
Yes, I basically do. And it was actually, I started to perceive a flaw in it. John McWhorter, then he was writing for the Daily News as a columnist, and he has mixed race daughters, and he critiqued my op-ed and started me down a path of really questioning what was my investment in upholding these ways of seeing.
Yeah.
And then, the more I thought about the ways in which racial identity had really reinforced the racism that hurt people like my father and his family, and then the more I read people like Barbara and Karen Fields, who authored this book, Racecraft, that I think is very brilliant, who argue that race functions in modern societies the way that witchcraft functioned in traditional societies. There's no such thing as witches, but you can be killed for being a witch in a society that believes in witchcraft. There's no such thing as different human races, but it's very real. And you can be killed for being the wrong race in a society that perceives and believes in race. Yeah. So, the more I thought about these things, the more I realized that these fictions are not just fictions that are wrong because there's some truth out there, but these are actually fictions that hurt people, that perpetuate racism. And so, that's another minority position where I'm really outside. I published that book in 2019. That was just, I guess it came out October 2019, so 6-7 months before the summer of 2020. That was the last time I could publish a book like that, and it got polite reviews.
Polite reviews.
It would. I mean, but that suddenly became my argument that we should all retire from being invested in this idea of distinct racial groups. That became attacked after 2020 as a kind of white supremacist position. Yeah. I was considered to be a self-hating black man, or to be a racist myself, in the new paradigm that had emerged. And so
racist against yourself.
And against blacks. And to be somebody that made it, Ibram X. Kendi told me that...
Wait, this is in person?
In person, yeah. At a talk he gave, he said that actually it's the white racist's dream to have a colorblind society. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, I interviewed Richard Spencer and some outright white nationalists, and I said that's the exact opposite of what they're telling me. Mm-hmm. They don't want a colorblind society at all. They want a society much like what we're moving into, where everybody has a heightened awareness of racial
very much
difference.
so.
Yes, and advocates for themselves as
such. It's a bizarre position to take.
Yeah, it's exactly the opposite.
White supremacists want a colorblind society. What is the argument?
He said that then they could allow their privilege and their domination to be invisible and unquestioned, and there's no way to advocate for minority groups if you don't have the racial categories. And I think that the past 5 years are bearing out that actually the white nationalists and the genuine white racists would like to advocate for themselves as whites and politically mobilize that way, and they really do not want a colorblind society.
Yeah, I mean, in the sense that it doesn't take very long for white nationalists, neo-Nazis, and all these knuckle draggers to understand that identity politics is what they've been practicing for years and what they've been after. And when the society itself is a nerd to the stupidities of these types of politics, that it's a great boon for their cause.
100%.
And it has been a great boon for their cause. And you, as somebody who's on Twitter, I mostly don't tweet, but I'm lurking around there quite a bit. The amount of straight up like racism that I see
open racism now, yeah,
is much more common now, and I don't think it's because Elon Musk took the guardrails off. If he had not taken the guardrails off, they'd be on Gab or they'd be on any of these other platforms, but they can be on these platforms. But the ideas are not incubated by the platforms themselves.
No.
In the fact that the platforms don't have terms of use like they pretended they did in the past, which are very selectively applied. I find it very, very strange that anyone would look at identity politics and not foresee the white nationalist types, the Spencer types, taking great advantage of this. And so where we are now, and that's the question I started with, and maybe we'll go back to that, is there are people I think that are much more blatantly racially discriminatory in their politics now after the racial reckoning, which presumably would be in their eyes, a racial awakening. But it was a racial awakening, but for white nationalists and people like that.
Yeah.
So I think it's like it had a lot of bad. Tell me if you think there's anything good that came out of 2020. I mean, you do mention a few things in the book about police reform and such.
Well, I do think that it was very important to recognize that, American policing is astonishingly violent by the standards of any other wealthy society.
But we're an astonishingly violent society.
We're also an astonishingly well-armed and violent society. But I think, it was valuable, and it is still valuable for us to be outraged when we see people brutalized or killed in police custody, specifically unarmed people. I always thought, and at the time was writing this, I always thought it was a mistake to organize that kind of revulsion at police brutality strictly along racial identity lines. I think, we should be just as outraged when Tony Timpa, a white man who was suffocated on camera by cops kneeling on his back and laughing in 2016 in Dallas, we should be just as outraged by Tony Timpa and draw just as much attention to that abomination as we do to George Floyd.
That's a quick interjection. I was in Kenosha after the Jacob Blake affair, and there was a young kid, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, who was skateboarding around, young black kid, filming, and everyone loved him. The Trump people loved him. The sort of lefty protesters loved him, and he was just like a straight up documenting this stuff. And he was from Kenosha, and I asked him, I said, look, I was interviewing him, I said, do the Kenosha police have a racism problem? I mean, just, you see this stuff close up. And he said, I have to be totally honest with you. I don't think they do. I think they have a power problem. And that was Jacob Blake, could have been Tony Timpa, could have been a lot of people. The power issue in his mind, and I'm just saying what this young kid told me, and he was a young black kid, was much more important than the racial element. But that didn't fit the narrative.
It doesn't fit the narrative.
And the narrative was pretty firmly cast right away.
The narrative was that, this language was used. That's why I think the book, it really bends over backwards to quote people in their own words. The language of the moment was that there is a genocide in this country against black men. That's just so extraordinary a claim.
LeBron James said they're hunting us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hunting.
This was the kind of language, that kind of hyperbole, that kind of overreaction, and then taking that claim and at a moment of having, kind of peak institutional power and influence, converting that into a kind of domination, institutional domination, I think that really set the table for this extraordinary reaction that I think is worse than what preceded it. I want to be clear. I think what's happening now is worse than what's happening in 2020. But I think that it is in reaction, in response to that kind of excess and that kind of exertion of force within institutions in society that came out of greatly exaggerated claims of oppression. I think that, the idea that
just that phrase would make, would rankle a lot of people.
Which
right?
phrase?
Exaggerated oppression.
Mm-hmm. But it was.
But you believe that to be true, right?
I know.
I mean, I do.
Yeah, I know.
You know
that
to be true. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it never made sense to me why, in a world where George Floyd has died in Minneapolis, you need to fund my play on Broadway. Or in a world where George Floyd has died like this, we need to make amends by allowing me and my clique of poet friends to take over the enormous endowment of the Poetry Foundation, so we can give each other fellowships and whatever. Yeah. Because George Floyd died, I have to get into Harvard now. I must, because George Floyd died, I need to get that $100,000 speech.
For the essay? Do you remember that?
Yes.
Yeah,
and that was a rich white kid.
Black Lives Matter, 1,000 times?
Yeah, for the whole length of the space.
And he got in for, I don't know. He was white?
He was white, and he was.
I didn't know that.
His father was wealthy.
Yeah.
So he potentially took a middle class or working class black kid's spot.
Yeah.
But this kind of excess, I think it's hard to overestimate how much resentment that inspired, not just in white people, that inspired resentment in working class blacks and Latinos too.
Very much so.
Yes.
Very much so.
Who saw all of the kind of elite capture of the kind of desire to reckon with. There is a racist past in the society. People have been oppressed. George Floyd, I think, was fundamentally a poor person as well as being black. But I think a lot of, certainly my black friends who didn't go to college, a lot of them really were turned off by the Democratic Party and the idea that, all of the ways in which we look to address the social ills exemplified in George Floyd's death would be captured by people who have Ivy League educations or people who are high-profile actors and thought leaders.
Yeah,
is strange that there was no real work to actually change the lives of working class or poor black people. These ideas, even about police reform, were against the wishes of working class and poor black people in many instances.
Almost
always.
Yeah.
It was kind of this kind of theoretical, feel-good self-help that white liberals and certain kind of elite black activists liked in theory but didn't have to live with in practice.
Yeah. I mean, there's a bunch. I mean, that's a really good point. I mean, Times, and I always mention this book called The Black Silent Majority.
Yes.
Michael, he's got it from Harvard, and about that,
Michael,
the fact.
Javen Fortner?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. The crazy thing about this is that, I mean, when you first realize that the sentencing disparities between powder cocaine and crack cocaine were led by the Congressional Black Caucus and people like Charlie Rangel saying the fact that you don't take crack cocaine seriously is itself a byproduct of institutional racism, and the fact that you treat this as like not the plague that's destroying our communities, we need to get tougher on it. And then that very thing becomes, again, an instrument of racism that is, it's like when you trace a lot of this stuff back, it's like who makes the calls to get cops to come? Because they don't do these offensive policing very much anymore. Changed quite a bit.
It was the cashier in the Cup Foods who made the call, the fateful call for George Floyd. Yeah,
and I think he had to leave town. I think there was something about that. I mean, when you look at these numbers, there's always these numbers that first, we always know that there's this institutional capture in these sort of upper middle class, rich, mostly white people that live in Park Slope and the Upper West Side and Fort Greene and all this stuff, telling everybody about race, right? Telling everybody about how we should do these things. And then it's always those things, those statistics that make you stop and say, well, I should have figured that Latinos, most people hadn't heard of Latinx.
Right.
And I think it was like 2% had ever used it.
Right.
Yet if you didn't do that when you were writing a piece for the New York Times, it would be corrected, say, no, use the correct terminology. that literally nobody uses.
Right. So who do they think they're writing for? Who are they communicating to?
Yeah.
It can't be overestimated the degree to which it matters that Trump grew his coalition among non-white voters. The only group that he didn't grow support with was actually white voters. That matters, and that gets kind of glossed over in a lot.
And the Hispanic male increase was
enormous,
astronomical. I mean, gone from and I always point out the most Hispanic county in America, Starr County, which I went and did a little documentary on.
Where is that?
It's in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas on the border. It's mostly Tejano Mexicans, multi-generation Mexican Americans who voted for Hillary Clinton and then voted for Biden, but just by a barely small majority, and then went pretty dramatically for Trump. And it's literally 98 or 99% Hispanic. And I always make the joke there's 3 white guys left who just got lost. And they're like, all right, I guess we'll hang out here. And they probably voted for Kamala. But yeah, those differences. I mean, it's also the question I have for you, and you looking back at this stuff, how do things that are purely emotional, that are purely reacting to not getting either canceled or looked at askance by people? The other great poll question I think is really telling is when people were asked how many unarmed black men are killed by the police every year. And some people would say into the thousands.
Yeah, they really overestimate.
I mean, there were thousands, 10,000. In the year of George Floyd, I think it was 18. And when you cut those numbers down, you saw that a lot of the police officers themselves were black.
That's the other thing, yeah.
Right? So that, there's a lot of complications to this story that are flattened in those numbers are when you tell people that, 10 people, 15 people are unarmed who are shot every year. And sometimes, it's they're holding a phone and it looks like a gun and somebody made a bad mistake. Not just someone not like Rodney King, which is 5 guys beating up on a guy at some length to insane excess, right?
Yeah, oh sure.
And that the story that we hear versus the numbers to back it up, the disconnect is so enormous.
Right. Well,
how does that happen?
I think in general, this was clearly the case with COVID. We just really don't think probabilistically very well. As humans, I don't even think it's an American problem. It's hard for us to really understand how small 18 even high-profile deaths in a population of 44 million black Americans in a country of almost 340 million total Americans, how rare that is. And I think this is also an aspect of the way that technology changes the discourse. These killings, one reason why we overestimate how frequent they are is because of the degree to which we see them over and over again. Also, black crime is wildly overestimated. Because there's all of these videos that are shared on X of black crime, or at the time of at points during the time that I've lived in France, Fox News will get obsessed with how there are no-go zones in Paris because there are places where Muslims have completely taken over. And it's I live a block away from that street, but one time there was an incident that Fox played over and over again. So this kind of availability of looking at certain violations or certain crimes or certain police killings, I think it makes people think it's more common than it actually is because it's so common in our media ecosystem.
It's kind of an unsolvable problem, isn't it? In the sense that we thought, I have to say, I never thought this, but in 2016, 2015, Trump is running for the presidency, and he's just making stuff up because
just totally making stuff up.
So we have this invention of the fact-checking industrial complex, and then we realize it doesn't matter.
Right.
It doesn't matter. People that's not true. And now we're at a place now where Tucker Carlson and people like that are out there talking about, the Mossad hand and everything, conspiracies everywhere, demons, underwater alien civilizations, crashed UFOs. And it's where are the fact checkers? It's it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
People don't care if it's true. The feeling about it in the tribal loyalties that it creates is we're on the side of Trump, we're on the side of MAGA, we're on the side of Black Lives Matter, whatever it means. So it's kind of what we do is kind of useless in some ways.
I don't know
right?
about you, but I felt like it was really, we were in a new level of disregard for the truth when J.D. Vance he has this very intelligent way of speaking and very reasonable sounding way of speaking when he said, it may not be true that they're eating cats and dogs in Ohio, but it was true to my constituents. And so, it represented a larger truth that they feel.
It's when the right becomes the left. Remember, this is like the postmodern, this kind of postmodernist thing, and it's like, it speaks to a larger truth.
That's what he said.
It might not be true, but it speaks to a larger truth, which, by the way, is an abdication of your responsibilities as a vice president at this point, but as a public intellectual, is say that the truth is actually irrelevant in this scenario. Is like, why are we doing this then?
Totally.
Why does any of this matter if the truth is irrelevant?
And to be fair, that's what a lot of the conversation was whenever you'd get nitpicky about police killings or things like that on the left. They would say, basically, don't let the facts get in the way of the truth. That we know this is an anti-Black society.
We're living in a police state.
Yeah.
That kind of thing that I heard all the time. And it's like, if we're living in a police state, I don't know why nobody at my stop has been told this, because nobody pays for the subway.
Ever.
It's like fucking hurdles. Everyone's just jumping over it. And I'm like, where is this police state that I hear so much about? People running red lights. I'm like kind of wishing for a police state at this point.
Totally.
And well, Zoran will come and fix it by just making everything free so it's no longer illegal. You were the co-writer of this famous Harper's letter, which you write about in the book. And for those of you out there in TV land who are unfamiliar with it, it was 2000.
It was a month after Floyd.
Okay.
Came out 2020. July.
Tell us about this letter, and 150 plus intellectuals signed it. What is the premise of this letter in Harper's?
So this is the most straightforward and simple premise possible. The letter said that...
or so you thought.
So we thought.
Yeah.
What was complicated was who signed it. But the letter was 3 paragraphs, and it was my buddy George Packer, David Greenberg, Mark Lilla, and Bobby Worth. The 5 of us drafted and recruited people to sign this letter that said, illiberalism has its greatest champion in the figure of Donald Trump, but there's a tendency on the left that's very troubling to censor views that aren't deemed appropriate, to be supremely intolerant of diverse perspectives within the media or the university system, and that we should, rather than stigmatize or try to cancel, we didn't use the word cancel, but rather than try to stigmatize and punish and attack the livelihoods of people we disagree with, we should try to meet speech we disagree with more speech and expose bad ideas to the disinfecting light of reason.
Totally normal.
That was it.
Yeah.
That was the letter.
Yeah. And you got people on the left and the right. You got Noam Chomsky. You got Salman Rushdie.
Cornel West. Margaret Atwood signed it. But then, we had J.K. Rowling sign it. Barry Weiss signed it. And so people read the signatures and said, yeah, there's nothing necessarily wrong, although I don't like the timing. Why are they talking about problems on the left? There's a genocide of unarmed Black men in American society. Is it really the time to talk about censoriousness on the left? We need to be reckoning with this anti-Black history.
And one of my criticisms of the letter was that the actual letter itself went out of its way to talk about the right and about how you think the problem
opens with a critique of Trump.
It opens the critique, and it's like, my criticism of that was like, hey guys, they're not going to care. No one is going to say, well.
You were right.
Yeah, I was right about that.
They did not care. Yeah. Most people don't even know or don't ever even seem to be aware that there was a criticism of Trump in there. Oftentimes people say, why didn't you criticize the right? But it seems that you could read the letter if you looked at signatures in any way you wanted. So there was actually, one of the things that really surprised a lot of us was the first thing was that this is an anti-trans letter. And so people were like, look, Jesse Singal, J.K. Rowling, and they said there's all these dog whistles in the letter that are anti-trans. Then some people said, no, this is a Zionist letter, like connect Brett Stevens, Barry Weiss, and so it's a Zionist letter. And then people were saying, no, it's actually
the notorious Zionist Noam Chomsky.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's just like to throw you off the
And
trail.
you could have gotten Norman Finkelstein if you didn't, but who ultimately wrote a book about how much he hated this kind of censorious culture. Literally wrote like before October 7th when he went back to being Norman Finkelstein, unfortunately. But he wrote a book like I'll Burn That Bridge When I Come to It, I think it was called.
That's a good title.
But he's very funny about this and very smart about this issue. And he's somebody that not only is not a Zionist, I think that if he could press a button and blow up the state of Israel, he would.
Yeah,
So
yeah, he probably would.
You can find people in that letter who probably are pro-tariff and anti-tariff. I mean, it seems crazy.
I mean, there were conservatives who signed the letter, but there was no pro-Trump signatory. But that was, I'm not sure that there were many. It seemed like a very small set of people who were like really MAGA and very pro-free speech and anti-censorship, anti-cancel culture, pro-liberal values. That didn't seem to be, I couldn't think of somebody that fit that category. But one of the things that really shocked us was that one of the high-profile signatories, Jennifer Finney Boylan, at the
You mentioned this in the book.
Yeah, columnist at the New York Times and now the president of PEN America.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
The premier, free speech organization defending writers.
Well, kind of, yeah.
That's the mission.
They weren't so great on Charlie Hebdo, but yeah. There were some people that were good, but a lot of members weren't.
Right. That was the beginning of this. That was in 2015.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning of this kind of great awakening where traditional liberal values were incompatible with where the progressive left wanted to go.
Yeah.
And there was an illiberalism on the left that felt new at that. That was one of the early instances.
For sure.
Jennifer Finney Boylan tweets immediately the day the letter is published and says, I am so sorry. The responsibility is mine. I thought I was signing a letter defending, values that I believe in. I thought some good people were signing it. I knew Gloria Steinem. I knew Noam Chomsky. I am so sorry I let the community
That was
down.
the line, and she mentions Margaret Atwood too.
Yeah.
That was the line that alarmed me most about that. It was that, I saw that there were liberals on this.
I saw I was in good company.
I saw I was in good
supposedly.
company. That's not why you signed something.
That's
you should be in
what
bad
Malcolm
company
Gladwell-
too.
Yeah.
And by the way, Noam Chomsky, for all of the 99.9% of the things he says I disagree with, he's been very adamant about the speech stuff.
Yeah.
And he's been criticized for was it Paul Rassenay, the Holocaust denier in France, and he made some weird statements about that. But I mean, he's been on the side of people that one would assume. I know some people think he does, but one would assume he doesn't agree with. And so it's not incompatible for him. So if she knew anything
About him.
yeah, she would have probably thought twice because
Right.
Noam Chomsky will defend bad, in his mind, bad people's speech. There was nobody bad in that letter, but you're talking about other people's speech.
The person I think that made it so explosive and why we still talk about the letter probably in many ways is J.K. Rowling's signature.
Yeah.
That was what everybody was objecting to. But Malcolm...
But again, 80-20 issue.
80-20
Yeah.
issue. And Malcolm
Yeah.
Gladwell responded on Twitter in a way that I thought was just perfect. He said, that's the strangest thing I've ever heard. He said, I signed the letter precisely because I knew there were people I disagree with signing the letter because these were basic values that we can all agree are important and need defending, regardless of what we think about other issues.
Any of the people that criticized that letter, the ones that, later went back on their signature, if we pulled them here right now and put them in front of us and asked a simple question unrelated to the letter and just said, do you think that this country, because of Twitter, because of Donald Trump, whatever you want to say, is too polarized? They would invariably all say yes. Is there nothing more polarizing than saying I cannot be a signatory to a letter about free speech, a very benign kind of, we want to debate issues, we don't want to shun people, we want to, sunlight being the best disinfectant and everything. That is itself the most polarizing idea, to say, I can't be on board with that because we cannot be what we want. The great thing about that letter to me is that there's people we all disagree with, but we have a fundamental bedrock of values that we agree on, and from there we can disagree.
Exactly. That was Malcolm Gladwell's exact point when he said that to Boylan. But unfortunately, I think we're farther away from a consensus on that than we were. And these ideas are really falling apart on the right as well. I mean, I would be remiss to say...
Yeah, we've been talking about it on the show, so yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I would be remiss to say that I wasn't supremely disappointed with a lot of people, so-called heterodox centrists, who at the time aligned with the Harper's letter, but have been more than willing and eager to abandon principles of tolerance, viewpoint diversity, and anti-cancel culture. Now that the right is ascendant and they have the sword of cancellation in their possession and are happy to actually use it, to wield it.
It's cancellation. It's you can go beyond that and look at politicians. And we kind of all fundamentally know they don't believe in anything, and they're a bunch of rat bags, almost every one of them. Just to want to be in the presidency or in Congress, to me, is just a weird instinct. It's a weird bit of narcissism to want to be the president. But and we do have a president who's a bit narcissistic.
You think?
A little bit. But if you have conversations with people who believed in free trade but no longer do, that's a great example. People who made their careers, Larry Kudlow, made his career being a free trader, free market guy, no longer. And I'll say on the other side too, I was talking about this the other day, Bill Kristol. The hostages were released and Bill Kristol has become so monomaniacally opposed to Trump, which, in some parts I understand, was not joining in the chorus of people tweeting about this is great news. I mean, from Bill Kristol to not say anything, and Bill Kristol's now a liberal. And the things that he said, they're out there talking about Columbus Day. It's like, go back to the Weekly Standard. Do you think they had some pieces about Columbus Day when he was the editor? How do you change your mind so quickly on all these issues? You can say, my people abandoned me, right? And I'm embarrassed by them, but I am going to stick by my principles. Also disappointed to see people say, now I have a totally different belief system.
Yeah.
Because bad people are out there identifying themselves as something I used to identify as. Very odd. Instinct.
I think there's I've really seen this firsthand with a lot of people that I know and like in this industry. There's such a desire to be on a team, to be part of a group, to have people people who will come to your defense when you're being attacked. I think, it's really that lonely position. Sam Harris has talked very well about this. When you really disagree on certain important points with both sides, no one really comes to your defense when you're attacked. And I think most people just really are more willing to, probably without even thinking through how it looks hypocritical, they just are more open to revising their opinions so that they are aligned with a group that they can be a part of, as opposed to really sticking to their principles and having no support structure. I just think that it's like basic human psychology. People don't want to sit alone in the cafeteria. Very few people are willing to do that, and that's what explains quite a lot of it. But it's been astonishing to see. I think actually the issue you raised that's been most alarming is like people have devoted their whole lives to views that Trump is contradicting with tariffs. I mean, people are having to fundamentally justify something that they have never believed was right, and they've all jumped on board. It's the most
insane.
I've never seen something like that in politics in my life.
I mean, like
lifelong libertarians.
Libertarians. It's like I am not a fan of Tom Massey's for a lot of reasons, but I'll give Tom Massey credit for being one of the very few people. Rand Paul's been pretty good about this too, of being maintaining their principles.
You see how lonely they are.
They're very lonely.
By the way,
it's not easy.
Lonely.
I mean, my friend Peter Meyer, who was a congressman for one term, and stood up as a Republican and said January 6th was an abomination. Donald Trump is an abomination for the way he responded to January 6th. And it was only going to get worse with pardons of people who should never have been pardoned. Whereas I have mentioned many times, too, that I think some people were over-sentenced in the January 6th stuff. I mean, I know that you, second to last chapter of your book's about January 6th. But that kind of stuff is rare because politics is money, too, in so many ways. If you want to do a show and make a lot of money, look at the top 10 of the iTunes podcast list in America. Tucker Carlson, Candace Owen, who seems to be having a psychotic breakdown every minute of the day and is being richly rewarded for it. It's like, what is that telling people? Indulge your worst instincts, and that's where our politics will go, but you'll make a lot of money in doing it. You wrote, and we'll finish on this, you wrote a piece recently. A little bit of trouble you got for this.
We were in Nashville.
The Twitter pylon on, and I guess this is people reading the headline. They may be, tell us the headline of the story, and that will explain the response.
MAGA gets its George Floyd. MAGA gets its own martyr. And then one of the, because there's several headlines.
It was a Charlie Kirk,
Yeah, the MAGA movement gets its George Floyd, and then the deck was something about how Charlie Kirk's death, has been used by the right. This is one of the, you have this like sneaking suspicion that people don't really read. Most people aren't reading. You kind of know vaguely that people only look at headlines and share the article. But this was really one of those moments where I knew that almost no one was reading the article. It was just this headline was going around because the response was that how dare you, well, the response on X was how dare you compare, an upstanding Christian family man to a crackhead who died because, he was unhealthy. Which was the other thing. He wasn't even killed was the response that most people were making on X. He didn't actually killed. He just died. He would have died anyway if Derek Chauvin weren't there. How dare you make that comparison? On Blue Sky, I was amazed too, because on Blue Sky, they're like, how dare you compare like an innocent man who was brutalized and killed by the state to an absolute white supremacist
Is
racist.
That right?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So you got it in
It was on both ends,
both
man.
directions.
On both ends. How dare you compare our canonized figure who's without fault to this really fallen, despicable other man? And I don't think on X they could even understand the way that people on Blue Sky, and vice versa.
We are absolutely living in two different worlds.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So the response, and my response to this is the criticism you got, is I'm saying, oh, these
I'm not
people
comparing these
on
men.
X, and you're not, and you say you're not comparing them. It's just the kind of finding the martyr figure.
Yes.
And look, there was some I think there was a really disgusting version of that from George Conway, who just posted a picture of Horst Wessel, who was the young Hitler youth who was killed in 1931 or 1932, and then became the official Nazi song, Horst Wessel Lied, which is a song they all sang. It was called Fahne hoch, Our Flag's High, and it was about Horst Wessel. And they made a movie about him called Hitler Junge Gewächs. And
They lionized him.
They lionized him, right? And he was a guy that was battling communists on the street. That kind of stuff from Conway I thought was despicable. But your argument is essentially that there's a lionization and people need their... Was there any criticism of that you said, okay, I get where you're coming from, it's not a terrible criticism?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, the piece was trying to think through the ways in which the woke movement of 2020 had a kind of martyr figure that became a kind of secular saint. I mean, and weird things were happening. Like there was the George Floyd Free State. In this shrine and area that was taken over outside the Cup Foods. People made pilgrimages there. Yeah. Murals went up. He became a kind of he was obviously a flawed man, but this movement, this reaction, this use of his name and life in death became a way to enforce certain ways of speaking, to enforce certain discourses around anti-racism, and to dominate opposition and to silence opposition, the use of his death. And I saw the same thing happening on the right. The day after Charlie Kirk dies, J.D. Vance guest hosts his podcast and starts telling people to shut down any criticism of Charlie Kirk, inform on anybody you hear talking about Charlie Kirk to their bosses. Congressmen started getting teachers in Florida fired if they said the wrong thing about. There became an enforced obligatory response and a kind of enforced respect. That also happened with George Floyd, but you will not just be neutral, but you will respect Charlie Kirk. You will say positive things about Charlie Kirk. You will observe Charlie Kirk National Remembrance Day. You will fly your flag at half-mast at Columbia University. You must sanctify this man. You must genuflect before this figure. There was that kind of same use of a death to dominate politically the opposition. And I was interested in that, but just to finish,
yeah, sure.
What did anybody... Of course, it's not a perfect analogy, and I do think it's a lot of people on the right kept insisting that the difference is that no one was burning down anything in the street after Charlie Kirk died, and there was no violence. People were praying, people were sad, and people felt that it was heinous to mock someone's death. All of that is true, but it doesn't mean that the death and the figure of Charlie Kirk wasn't being weaponized by people to their own political advantage. And I think that, it's actually much more disturbing if the vice president is using the death to tell people to inform on each other than even if you're vandalizing a building. I mean, the insertion of state power into this stuff around Kirk was very disturbing to me.
That should always give people pause. Do you think there's... I think where I think the analogy breaks down is that I do think it's important, and it's not important to say, George Floyd was on drugs and he had a criminal history. I don't think that that's what we should do in this country ever. If a person is killed when he shouldn't have been killed,
right.
It's like I thought the debate over the Luigi Mangione assassination of the healthcare executive, to not have a debate about healthcare at the moment. It's like you're basically allowing him to create those conditions.
You're validating it, yeah.
Yeah, I think of it as like somebody who runs on the field during a baseball game. They now turn the camera away from them, encourage people doing this in the future. I think that's a bad thing to do. But at the same time is that somebody who's in a police interaction and, not being terribly cooperative, but that doesn't mean anything. It's useless for me to say that because the end result should not be a person dead. But whereas someone was practicing free speech, whether you think that's abhorrent, his speech itself is abhorrent or not, he was engaged in dialogue, much like Ezra Klein got a lot of shit for saying this is what you should do. So Kirk himself is an avatar to a lot of people of debate, of actually interchanging ideas with people, whereas George Floyd is an avatar of nothing positive, but the unfortunate victim of, shall we very neutrally say, very overzealous policing.
Right.
I mean, we could just say, the guy died, he was killed. Derek Chauvin went to prison for it. But there is a fundamental difference there, isn't there?
There is a difference there between them, absolutely.
One is more likely to be lionized, right?
One is more likely to be lionized, but what is the response here? Both were used as instances of people who were victimized and killed because of their identity.
Yeah.
So George Floyd was killed because he was black, and there is this kind of, I think, very dangerous discourse that Elon Musk and the president, vice president, and everybody were promoting, saying that Charlie Kirk was killed because they hate you, white Christians, conservatives, they want you dead. People were saying very, very irresponsible, kind of enormous declarations like that. I don't know who Elon Musk means when he says they. They kept saying the left. But so this idea that Kirk was...
It's like saying the police.
Yes, exactly. Kirk was killed for his identity by this enormous force in American society. Just like Floyd was killed for his identity by this enormous force, and therefore the reaction can never be excessive. Anything is almost can be justified. But of course you're right that it's... I never intended for people to come away from the article and say, Charlie Kirk, he's just like George Floyd. That's and I think it is important to stress that George Floyd was a guy that really was a repeat offender, had all kinds of problems, and Kirk was a successful guy. So it's clearly not that kind of comparison, but I felt like a lot of people, there's just an unwillingness to engage. There's a kind of snowflake tendency to not even be able to engage with an argument that makes you a little bit uncomfortable to see if there's anything there. I think, like Matt Walsh is the guy who first shared the article. And then, the quality of responses you get to it are not very sophisticated. But, I was amazed at how much conversation it prompted, and maybe a small percentage of that did get people to think. But, the subtitle of the book that you opened with is the demise of discourse in the age of certainty. So I think both of those aspects were in play with the reaction to this article. It's just everyone's certain that they know their side is right, and it becomes very difficult to have a kind of mutually respectful disagreement, or that even produces a kind of new way of seeing things. That's why I actually thought that the conversation between Klein and Coates was actually a version of, if not doing politics the right way, doing public discourse the right way, having a disagreement and not refusing to engage, but actually speaking more about it and trying to hash it out, even if you can't convince the other person.
Yeah. No, I thought it was interesting and ultimately unsatisfying in some levels, and dishonest, I think, from certain things that Coates said, particularly about violence. I think that, his father's a Black Panther. He, quotes Leroy Jones, the poet laureate.
Baraka,
Amari Baraka, as he changed his name to, who's like a wild anti-Semite. I'm sure he'd probably say nice things about Assata Shakur. Like, different types of violence mean things to different people. But I think it's funny that it doesn't matter whether George Floyd was a good person, a bad person, because right after that we did have Jacob Blake, and not only was Jacob Blake just objectively,
there's
a bad
no
person,
nuance there,
and he had a knife, and he was violating a restraining order. He had previously sexually assaulted this woman. None of this was initially reported.
He was in the process
breaking
of
up a
kidnapping
fight.
his kids.
Yeah, he was accused of giving up his kids. The first report is he break up, and President Biden went and visited him. I was there. I was in Kenosha.
You're right about
when
that.
he was like, no, this is not. That was a point in which we were so desperate to fulfill the narrative that we were pulling people that made that narrative look rather weak and rather bad and rather unimpressive. All right, final question I'll ask you is where are we now? Like, are you? This is what Matt and Camille call the French goodbye. The final question could be like 3 hours, but that's the French goodbye. It's like, so why are we here? Why does the earth exist? Is God real? But honestly, though, where are we in this thing now that has flipped so dramatically from 2020? The book you start writing in 2021. You're surveying all this in real time, and at the other end of this, I guarantee, because the same thing is true of me and every single person that we both know, is that in 2021 we never would have saw this coming. You say that the right is weaponizing things in the way that the left did in 2020. Is there any hopefulness in Thomas Chatterton Williams about where we landed from 2020 to 2025?
I'm always hopeful, and I think that people are mostly decent, and I think we're in a very dangerous position now. A lot of us were warning that we were setting some things in motion that were going to lead to an inevitable backlash. The backlash has come far harder and more, I think, more cruel, and just rejoicing in imposing cruelty on others and breaking with norms and breaking with propriety. That the backlash has been much harsher than I would have expected, but I did expect there to be enormous backlash against what I really believe was a very overconfident left overplaying its hand, its modest hand. But I think nothing is going to change if there's not some real political leadership and rethinking. How do you win a majority of Americans? How do you get them to believe your vision is more attractive than a vision that Trump presents them with as a kind of punishing what they didn't like about you? How do you make an attractive Democratic...
Or do you even have a vision at all?
Do you even have a vision at all? I'm worried that they have a lack of vision right now. And then you need a leader who can articulate that and get people mobilized. So I think we're lacking all of those things now. And I think that the right is really consolidating a kind of authoritarian power that's going to make contesting it harder than it would have been if we didn't have to course correct in the first place. But as long as what did James Baldwin say? I'm a black man. As long as I'm alive, I'm an optimist.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's very important. I'd like to leave on this note. It's very important to recognize that as bad as things are, actually, this is still the most opportunity and in many ways the most progressive culture imaginable. And, incremental progress is real. And I live in a different country than my father grew up in. It's just a fact, things aren't over. And I think we have to see things clearly before we can correct them. And that's what this book is really trying to do, is to get people to reflect and introspect, because there's such a willingness just to always say that, but Trump, and then you don't have to do the hard work of thinking, but Trump he doesn't exist in a vacuum. Why do people find him more appealing than they find the alternative?
I think that watching the CNN town hall, mysterious town hall, which had no sort of news peg, with Bernie Sanders and AOC was pretty instructive, where Bernie Sanders seemed to have an idea of how to make the Democratic Party more palatable, in the sense that he's being Bernie Sanders forever, which is a kind of class warfare thing. And you know what? I am on the other side of these issues of Bernie Sanders, but just objectively, politically, it's very powerful. It was powerful for Trump. It was powerful for him in 2 primaries. And, the Democrats had to step in and try to derail him in 2016 because it was so powerful, and they did. And then AOC was talking about transphobia, and it was just like, I think this might be the wrong lesson Democrats would take from a inevitable Mamdani victory for mayor of this city. It's a very different kind of set of politics here than it is everywhere else. And they shouldn't get too excited about this and say the AOC kind of vision of the party, because that is going to confine that party to the ash heap of history for a very, very long time. And to push back on the Trump stuff, you need somebody who's not Trump on the other side, but has a very clearly articulated way of moving on from what your book very brilliantly crystallizes, the madness that really kind of reached its zenith in 2020, 2021.
Very well put. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I maybe there is going to have to be a kind of articulation of class solidarity that's going to be the antidote to what's going on with the right-wing populism that proved so seductive. Because the fact is that we live in such an unequal society that something's got to give, and a lot of that was filtered through the lens of identity, and that worked for a while. But identity is a depleted resource right now.
It's also just a bad way of looking.
It's just a bad way
at the world. All right, Thomas Chatterton Williams, The Summer of Our Discontent is out now. There it is, Summer of Our Discontent, The Age of Certainty and the Demise of Discourse. See how well when it's on the screen that I can read that, Thomas? Buy that book. Your previous book, 2019, still out there in print. Loved that book when it came out. I have to go revisit that.
Thank you.
But please keep making people angry, and make them only read the headlines and read nastier and crazier headlines, because then you can come back and we can talk about them. Thomas.
With pleasure.
Thanks for being here. All right, for the rest of you, you know what to do. By the way, I want to apologize for something. I said on Tuesday last week, come back and see us on Thursday, and we didn't do a show on Thursday. What should I lie? What should I say? I had mono. Or that's what I was going to say. I came down with a very bad case of mono. That's a thing, right? But this week we do again have a show, and it's like who is the late night show who's always introducing the guy who keeps getting bumped? Is it Kimmel that did that? Oh, didn't he get canceled because he loves assassinations or something? Don't remember why. But yeah, like that. We're doing this again because I've announced this 78 times. My friend Danny Polachek will come and be here on Thursday, I promise, unless something terrible happens. But that's the 3rd time I've promised that. All right. But go watch other episodes at Moynihan Report on YouTube. And, just watch the show. It's a great show. It's the best show. And thanks to my friend Thomas. And we'll see you with Danny, I hope, on Thursday.